Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Worx WX291L 20-volt brushed impact driver. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot. Battery slot is located at the bottom of the tool, as usual on an impact driver, and overall it's a very secure battery slot. As a matter of fact, I think this is probably the best battery slot I've seen on any tool, and that includes Ryobi. There is next to no wiggling, jiggling, or movement from side to side, and only a tiny bit of movement when you slide it forward or backwards, and it takes quite a bit of force to achieve that bit of movement. So overall, I think the battery slot on this particular tool is just about perfect, and it definitely gets 10 out of 10. So with that being said, let's move on. And next up we have the belt clip. Now the belt clip is an accessory which you can either mount on the tool or leave off the tool, but it is included, which is very nice considering that a lot of brands will make you purchase them separately. Overall, the belt clip is made out of a stainless steel metal, and it seems to do its job just fine. I don't really have any complaints, and it works as intended. So yeah, it passes with flying colors, and I'm grateful that they included it, and it gets the job done. So yeah, moving on. Okay, next up we have the LED light. Now the LED light on this particular tool is located at the base of the tool and features a single LED light. The LED light will become activated when the trigger is pressed and will turn off when you let go of the trigger. Now, unfortunately, the LED light is pretty weak when it comes to the light output. It's still somewhat usable, but it's definitely not going to be all that wonderful for, well, illuminating your workspace or, well, looking for that screwdriver you dropped because you forgot to pack your work light. Overall, I'm glad they included an LED light, but it would have been nice to have something a little bit more powerful. So this is definitely a weak area on this particular tool. So with that being said, let's move on. Okay, next up we have the grip. Now the grip is a fairly standard design. You have rubberized texture on the back, you have rubberized texture on the front, the middle part is made out of hard plastic, and overall is a very comfortable grip, and I really do like the way it feels. But unfortunately, the angle of the grip really makes this tool unpleasant to use in a lot of situations. If you're doing a job that requires you to work close to the ground, a lot of the times I'll just use the impact driver upside down or on its side, and I won't have any issues. But because of the way that the grip is angled, it makes it almost impossible to use this tool upside down close to the ground, where that's where you usually be using the impact driver upside down, and you'll have to use it in a sideways position, which just makes it kind of awkward to hold and just kind of messes up the whole feeling of, well, holding an impact driver. Overall, I'm really not a fan of the angle of the grip, and it actually is kind of a big deal killer for me personally. I'm sure some people can get used to it and won't mind it as much as me, but for me personally, the angle of the grip is just really bad, and just really makes this tool a pain to use in tight spaces or in close to the ground scenarios, like installing screws at the bottom of a fence or on a foundation or something. If we compare it against the Ryobi is definitely aiming much more, well, straight or close to the 9 o'clock position, and the Worx is definitely angled upward and looks like it's more pointed at, say, the 10 o'clock position. So quite frankly, if it was up to me, I'd be using the Ryobi far more often, and since it is up to me, I do. So at the end of the day, the grip is comfortable, but the angle is definitely a major deal killer for me personally. With that being said, let's move on. And next up we have the trigger. The trigger is fairly basic on this particular impact driver. It's made out of a hard black plastic, which is completely smooth without any sort of rubberized texture or molded indentations. Quite frankly, it's pretty basic. Now, the trigger itself is got a fairly smooth pull, and of course it's variable speed, and you'll be able to access most of the speeds fairly easily without having to worry about, well, accidentally bumping up to a higher speed or a lower speed. I will say I personally would have liked to have seen some lower speeds on this particular impact driver. The first speed is still a little bit quick for my personal liking, so this is an area of the tool that could use some improvement. So we'll cover that a little bit later in the pros and cons, but for the most part the trigger gets a pass, even if it is fairly basic. And next up we have the forward/reverse selector switch. Overall, the selector switch is a fairly standard design here. It's located behind the trigger and slightly above it, but below the motor housing. It definitely is as good as you can possibly get on this kind of tool. It's easy to push from side to side, and it's in a good location. And you can easily put it into the safety position to, well, lock the tool's trigger into the off position. So overall, I don't really have any major complaints here, and so it gets a pass. And next up we have, well, the 1/4 inch hex bit chuck. It's a fairly standard design. It's a quick insert, but it's basic. You have to pull the chuck forward in order to insert a bit, and you have to pull it forward to take the bit out. It doesn't stay open, and it doesn't have any sort of quick loading option. So quite frankly, this is definitely going to be as basic a chuck as you can possibly find on an impact driver. So at the end of the day, I think that this is another area of the tool that could use an update, but there's still plenty of brands using this low-end chuck style, so I'll give it a pass just because there's other brands still using it as well. Okay, without a battery, the impact driver weighs 1,135 grams, which is about 2.5 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 1,808 grams, which pops the weight up to around 4 pounds. So it's definitely kind of a heavyweight impact driver. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the tool in use. Overall, the tool in use, it had plenty of power, but unfortunately, like I said earlier, the angle of the grip really threw me off. I had lots of times where I was trying to fasten in a screw or something, and the impact driver would hop out, or I'd start too early, or it wouldn't go in straight, simply because, well, the angle of the grip is just not what I'm used to. It just made it very tricky to use in a lot of situations, and I don't know, I'm just not a huge fan of the angle of the grip. Now, the impact driver itself had plenty of power, and I don't have any complaints when it comes to its ability to, well, drive a screw into wood with a pre-drilled hole or without a pre-drilled hole, and it worked okay as a light-duty impact wrench. But at the end of the day, I really do prefer using an impact driver that has a, say, 9 o'clock position for the motor housing rather than one that has a 10 o'clock position. It just feels more natural. The other issue with this particular impact driver is the fact that, well, it's definitely got a long motor housing, which makes it very difficult to use in tight spaces. This is fairly standard for older impact drivers, but it's definitely starting to show its age in the world of new compact, high-powered impact drivers that are just, well, easier to work with, that are lighter weight, and you can get into tighter spaces. So I think at the end of the day, this particular impact driver is definitely, well, getting up there in years and probably should start looking at a retirement home. Just saying. Now, with that being said, let's move on to the pros and cons. Okay, first up, 20 volt. 20 volt means that you'll have more than enough power to finish up most of the jobs you'll find around your house, and you will also be able to adapt batteries over from other brands such as Makita or DeWalt with a third-party adapter. Just remember, you do that at your own risk. Powerful. Overall, this is a fairly powerful impact driver, and it should be able to finish up most jobs easily. So, at the end of the day, this is a pro in my opinion. Feeling of the grip. Overall, I really do like the way that the grip feels. It's very comfortable, and it definitely gives me a feeling of control when it comes to, well, the ability to grip the tool. But when it comes to the angle of the grip, that's another story. Well built. Overall, this is a very nice feeling tool to hold on to. It definitely gives you that feeling of quality. And I have to say, I really do like the build quality of this particular tool, even if there are some aspects of this tool that I personally am not a huge fan of. Belt clip. I'm really glad they included the belt clip and they didn't skimp out on it to save a couple of pennies. So this is definitely a pro in my opinion. And the first and only meh would be the LED. The LED just is not all that powerful. I'm glad it's there, but at the same time, I really would have preferred something a little bit more powerful. So it's not really a con, it's not really a pro, it's just kind of meh. And the first con would be the size. There are other impact drivers on the market now that are smaller and, well, just as powerful, if not more so, that are cheaper. So, quite frankly, this is something you need to take into account. And next up, we have the angle of the grip. The angle of the grip definitely makes this a very tricky tool to use, especially if you're used to using a tool that has a more neutral 9 o'clock position. And it definitely makes it difficult to use upside down as well. So, overall, I would definitely consider the angle of the motor housing or the grip to be a negative, in my opinion. But I'm sure somebody out there adores it and disagrees with me wholeheartedly, and that is their opinion. And next up we have the impact driver's price. Now the price of this impact driver tool only is $60, which isn't horrible, but still a little overpriced in my opinion. And if you want to pick it up with a 1.5 amp hour battery and a charger, you're going to be looking at around $105, which is definitely overpriced in my opinion. Okay, next up we have no super slow speeds. Because this impact driver doesn't have any super slow speeds, it can be a little bit challenging to work with, especially with smaller or more delicate fasteners. So with that being said, I do consider this to be a con. Old chuck. This is a basic chuck design and it's starting to show its years. So in my opinion, a better chuck could have been included considering the price point. And that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular impact driver. I really wanted to like this impact driver. I think it feels like it's well built. I think it has plenty plenty of power. I like the way that the grip feels, not the angle of the motor housing, but just the way that the grip feels, and I think it does a fairly good job. But unfortunately, because of the angle of the motor housing, the price point, and the fact it also uses an old school chuck, and it's also brushed, means that there's just too many things going against it for me to really be able to recommend to anybody. If you can pick one up for the extremely cheap price tag of around 20 bucks, it's probably worth it, but I would definitely not pay over $40 for this particular tool, just because I think there's other impact drivers on the market around the $50 to $60 price mark that are easier to use and are just as powerful, if not more powerful. So at the end of the day, would I recommend this particular tool? Nah, not really. I'd say take a look at a more expensive impact driver from Worx or a different brand entirely. With that being said, that's the end of this video, and we'll see you next time. God bless.